Harry Parker, the son of a general, joined the British Army when he was 23 years old. By 2007, he was serving his country in Iraq. 2 years later, he was a captain and serving in Helmand in Afghanistan. Out on foot patrol one day, he stepped onto an IED. 6 years and many operations later, he's found the time to write his novel, Anatomy of a Soldier. It's inspired by his own deeply personal experience, but told by 45 objects.
I was created by an explosive reaction from a device that functioned to form me. I passed through rock, through mud, through dust, through the air, through the sole of a boot, through a man. I stamped through them all, folding them in shock and pressure and dragging them with me. The object sort of took away an element of sort of sentimentality, and I wanted to stay away from the politics of it. I think there's been some great sort of non-fiction books and memoir out there, but I really want to stay away from the fact that what the kit was like and why we were there.
What's so amazing about this book is that the objects through whom you describe what happened to you almost got a sort of human quality. I mean, they're not judgmental, but they're observing this extraordinary process.
They're not sort of sentient. I didn't want them to have too much personality, but they have a certain tone. So as you say, so the explosion is quite sort of malevolent, I suppose, and the mother's handbag, which describes when the main character, Tom Barnes, comes back from theatre and she sees him for the first time. There's something sort of very sort of personal about a
It's very observational, isn't it? These objects are observing all these things that happen to you.
And they have a certain point, and they move around the world obviously differently to a human. And I thought that was a really interesting way of showing it, really.
And as you wrote this book, were you aware of the fact that you were doing something really very original in literary terms?
When I started getting away from trying to get away from me, I tried to write something from the point of view of animals, and it wasn't very good. And so it became the sort of end point of that exploration, I suppose, of trying to take the point of view away from me. And as soon as I wrote the tourniquet chapter, which is the first chapter of the book, as a sort of short standalone story of the tourniquet sort of saving his life and what it would be like to show that from the tourniquet's point of view, I then wrote the next chapter, which was the fertilizer, which gets made into the IED, and then sort of the intubator, which is the thing that goes into his mouth to keep him alive, the breathing tube, when he first gets to hospital. So as soon as I started to build that, it was very interesting to have all these objects that are sort of in his orbit.
I mean, I can't imagine what you went through, but you must have been really angry. But there's no anger in this book.
It's right. I mean, I don't think I ever was angry. I was very frustrated by the injuries themselves, but I always felt if you're going to choose to be a soldier, then you have to accept that these things might happen to you. Whenever I soldiered, I always thought, how would I feel if there were foreign soldiers rambling past my house in London? I'd probably be planting bombs. So I think that, I always felt that there was always that side, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to tell the insurgent side in the story.
Yeah. You see it from both points of view, from the insurgent's point of view and from the British soldier's point of view.
Well, and I think I was always interested in the fact that in the press here, and a lot of people would always say how terrible a way it was to fight planting these IEDs, making them a minefield, and how awful that was. But I always think, dropping a bomb from 20,000 feet in the middle of the night was no different, really. A drone strike or something had the same sorts of, war is pretty rubbish, no matter how it happens.
So now that you've become a writer, do you regret ever having been a soldier?
Certainly this book I couldn't have written, obviously, without the experiences that I went through. I don't regret being a soldier, but I don't regret being injured either, because it's amazing.
You don't?
I don't know. In the book there's a passage where the main character says to his mum, I wouldn't change what happened to me. And I was trying to sort of communicate what I felt, not straight away, but quite soon, much sooner than I thought possible. It had become far too much a part of who I was.
I know you don't want to be political in this book, but reading the book, one does get an overarching sense of the futility of the entire exercise.
I suppose I wanted to show the fact that I love being a soldier as much as how crap it was to be blown up. So I wanted to show those two sides, the excitement of being a soldier, but also how difficult the recovery was. But when I got to the end, you suddenly realise that even if you're trying to write a book that's sort of very balanced, war is such a terrible activity that it's going to be anti-war. It's going to be something that shows the futility of war.